Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Represent STL. We are so excited to be back for our first episode of this season. My name is Adina Varner. I'm the Director of Learning and Community Engagement here at the Rep. And I have a wonderful group of panelists that are joining me today as we explore the intersectionality of art and faith, which is so critical and so crucial in our region. So I'm going to take a moment and let this amazing panel introduce themselves to you all. Sister Glennis, you can go first.
Okay. Hi, I'm Glennis Mary McManaman. I'm a Good Shepherd sister, and I am the director of Good Shepherd Arts Center, which is in Ferguson, and we serve the community through art.
Thank you, Sister Glennis. And Chris.
Hello, I'm Christopher Daniels, writer, director, producer. I also manage Team Focus Productions, and I work with youth in Normandy School District.
We're so excited to have you, Chris. Christian. Christian, you are muted.
I see that now. My apologies. Christian Blackman. I am a community organizer, art curator, activist. I do organizing work through many, many different intersections. So yeah, thank you for having me.
We're excited to have you, Christian. Dion.
Yeah, I'm Pastor Dion Garrett. I'm from Pathfinder Church out in West County in Ellisville. And we house the School of the Arts, where we have a really big arts next generation focus of raising up a next generation of people who can express themselves through art. So glad to be here.
That is awesome. Thank you, Pastor Dion. Next, we're going to go to Reverend Dr. Dieter Hansel.
Hi, I'm Dieter Heinzel. I'm one of the pastors at Ladue Chapel Presbyterian Church, and I also serve on the Planning and Steering Committee of Arts and Faith St. Louis, and I also represent our denomination on the Interfaith Cabinet St. Louis.
I'm Rabbi Neil Rose. I'm the probably chief educator at our synagogue. I do a lot of teaching. And I'm also one of the 3 chaplains at Jewish Child Family Services. And when the pandemic is not keeping us away, I do a lot of work with seniors. And I discovered very early on in working with seniors the degree to which music really allows us to connect with them and they with us.
Hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. That's the perfect segue, I think, into our conversation tonight. We want to just kind of open it up to you all to define artistry in your work and in your ministry and why it matters so much. Artistry is kind of a loaded word, but really it just means creation and self-expression. And so I'm just curious in terms of faith in particular, how is creating and making and crafting something really fundamental to your work in ministry and in activism and organizing, which is all an art form?
Yeah, I'll chime in here. For me, my theology says that God is foremost creative. That's how we know him first and foremost. And that we're his image bearers, so that we bear his likeness. Also in the New Testament, again, I'm guided by the scriptures that say that we are God's workmanship. We're his handiwork, his masterpiece, and that we've been created also to do good works, to bring good things into creation. And so I think just that's part of our birthright. It is our responsibility to create and bring good things into being.
Yeah, agree.
For me, art touches on mystery. If I open myself up to the creative act, I'm not operating necessarily out of the binary brain, think, logic, 1, 2, 3. It becomes playful. It becomes free. And I tend to believe that when people are creating things, they're not destroying.
That's true. I love that. Can you say more about that, Sister Glennis?
Yes, I think that when people put their hands to something and start making something, if it opens up a part, even if they're expressing anger and rage as they're making something, it's expressive, it's positive, it's a communication. When people are thwarted and they can't do that, it comes out in ways of breaking things up and tearing up relationships because can't go forward. Sometimes art allows you to go forward where thinking through something just won't work.
That's good. That's good. Anyone else want to share in terms of
that kind of ties in with what we do with Team Focus. What we do is we take like youth from around St. Louis, and we show them that they can create. You know, we got a lot of youth right now, ages 12 to 15. They're all making their own short films. They're learning all aspects of storytelling. And I mean, just to see their faces doing this stuff for the first time, they're going like, wait a minute, we can do this. And they're writing the scripts, and it's just amazing to see that creativity. And, you know, because it's one way, you know, you can preach to somebody, but then you can give them the tools that God gave them. And that's just as impactful. And, you know, it helps build a relationship both with God and show them who they are within him. So it's pretty good.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback off actually both of those points. So for me, like art has saved my life, like literally. And it's because in many different facets. So being able to write, so being able to journal, write poetry, being able to actually, you know, create, like you said, create with my hands. So being able to paint and all of and different things like that, draw, sketch. But for me, I mainly do art curation. So I've been curating art shows for almost a decade at this point, and being able to get out thoughts and ideas. So the first project that I did is called Invisible No More, and it is speaking to the plight of Black women and girls, specifically around when Black women and girls go missing, and that kind of grew into speaking to multiple issues that impact Black women and girls. But I'm saying that to say, because I felt like God pulled me in a way to do that. I was, you know, hearing about, and I started this in 2012. So it's been a big shift from then to now with how stories get shared and things like that due to social media and all of that. But at the time when I started it, it wasn't how it looks now. So it was an opportunity for me to not just talk about an issue, but be actually able to do something with it. So I was able to bring in visual artists who were friends of mine and poets who were friends of mine to speak to this issue. But now at this point, I've done a variety of shows. And something that you said, so I've been able to work with both established artists and emerging artists, but also being able to work with youth artists. And just that, at the time, I didn't realize. At first, it was like, oh, I have this idea. I got some artist friends. I want to curate these shows. Super cool. But now it's grown to be bigger than me. It's been an opportunity now for community to be able to be engaged in art, and specifically Black artists and Black art, because oftentimes the same opportunities aren't presented. I mean, this isn't like I'm not speaking anything new, but the opportunity for artists to be able to have a space to create, and also being able to hopefully potentially even get paid for that. So people being able to purchase their work and purchase their art. And then for community to be able to see artists that look like them. And I think all of that at this point has become an opportunity for not for me to just curate art shows, but also to be able to create a platform and access for artists and community to intersect, while also speaking to different issues that are important to the community. So that isn't just me doing that. I feel like God has moved me in a way to do that. And anytime I do anything, I always try my best to keep God at the center of that. And then real quick, and I'll stop talking, but like one of the first, not the very first Invisible No More event I did, but I think it was the second or third one, I was able to do one at the History Museum, and my entire church family came out and to that event. And my pastor was there, and a lot of my other church family was there, and it was just it just reminded me and affirmed for me that I was on the right track. So yeah, so for art personally helping me to navigate through some very tough low points, and then also just being able to, like you said, like, we're all artists, we're all creatives. It might look different for different people, but we've all been blessed to be able to create whatever that looks like. So that only God can allow us to have those gifts, skills, and talents in that way.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious, you touched on this a little bit, Christian, but what do you all believe is your role? And Christian certainly spoke to that, but your role to kind of create, to creatively or artfully create new opportunities for people in your community, whether it's in your congregation or whether it's in your neighborhood or the people that you don't yet know. How do you, what is your role? And as art leaders, as faith leaders, and in playing in that intersection, how do you create more opportunities for folks to grow, to learn in their art?
Can I hop in here for a minute?
Yeah.
I want to go back a little before. I think I, for whatever it's worth, I agree with everything that's been said. But let's go back a little bit and say that, and I know this is going to sound strange from me, but if you think about Jesus, Jesus was an artist, right? Whatever else you think of Jesus, right? The ability to tell parables in a way that moved people, right? The ability to tell stories that move people, right? There's great artistry in that. And it's part of a larger tradition of that comes out of the what you folks would call the Old Testament, a term I don't particularly like, but but because the biblical stories are told by artists, right? One of my favorite theories is that the book of Ruth, which is set in the harvest, in the spring harvest, was originally told and acted out on the fields at the end of the day. When people were finished working and they had kind of had a dinner, people would act out or tell the story of Ruth, because its background, its stage is the harvest field. And I think that in our tradition, point number two, and particularly in our morning prayer, we have a line that says, "B'chol yom tamid," every day, God is mechadesh b'tuvo. God recreates the world and everything that's in it. So I think that the whole notion of being created in the image of God is essentially, from our point of view, to be an artist, to be a poet, to be a storyteller, right? And I think that's rooted in our biblical tradition. And that, I think that's often overlooked because we place so much emphasis on the dogmatic rather than on the artistic. And in that sense, in the best sense of the word, biblical stories are best when they entertain. And entertain comes from a root in the Latin and the Greek, which means to draw the heart, right? So I think everything that's been said is, I totally agree with, for whatever my agreement is worth. But I think when we rather than to think of faith and art as somehow distinct, they really are part and parcel of, they go together. And I think that, that's an important part here. So for me, as I said before, when I think of Rabbi Jesus, I think of really a very fine performer who was able to draw the hearts of people and to create a sense in people that they could renew themselves, right? They could become new people. They could recreate themselves.
Well, I'd like to pick up on a point that Rabbi Rose was just making about, being doctrinal. And what I think art can do is to get us out of that mode of thinking. Because I think doctrines, to me, while they might be important, but they can also create divisions. And art, I can't argue with color. I can't argue with notes. I can't argue with poetry. I can't argue with whatever you want, to put in, to fill in that blank. And so I think it really is a great unifier that draws people together. And I think Sister Glennis said that before. It's also playful, and that would go, also to Rabbi Rose's entertainment comment. It's playful. Our faith doesn't have to be that serious all the time. I think, especially Jesus, I thought, he loved to party, he loved to have a good time. So that works okay for me. And so it's a great bridge building tool, I believe.
I agree, Dr. Dieter. Really quickly, I just want to bring someone else into the conversation that's just joining us. This is Reverend Darryl Gray. Reverend Gray, feel free to introduce yourself. Then Dion, I think you had a comment.
I'm Reverend Darryl Gray. I am the pastor of the Greater Fairfax Missionary Baptist Church, a member of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, and have been an ordained minister. I'm looking at the group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Longer than 5 of you have been born, been alive. And I'm counting. I won't tell you which 5 I'm talking about. I have a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's.
It looks like he was having some challenges. It's all right. He'll rejoin us when he can. Go ahead, Dion.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I love, I think one of the great lies is that art has become, in the realm of the elite. And that's what I was saying at the beginning. I think it really is all of our birthright. An artist, as you said at the beginning, Adina, sounds so lofty. Who's an artist? I'm not an artist, that's for some people. And I think faith has the power to restore to people their calling and their birthright as, no, I'm a creator. I get to create. And I think that's such a powerful thing that faith can give to people. And I don't have a bunch of, I'm probably not as good at this as I'm interested in what Christian was saying. But I think that's such an important thing that people understand, that this is not something that elite, skilled, highly trained people get to do of some certain class or some certain ability. This is something we all have. And it's really important that we all tap into that, because otherwise, I love what Sister Glennis said. Otherwise, I think we're part of this movement of destruction and death if we're not a part of this creative, life-giving thing.
And that's kind of like one of the main reasons and the passion to why I do what I do. I love being in the arts. I'm in the arts with the theater and film side, but I pick the people who are not trained. I pick the people who are starting from the beginning. One season I was teaching production side of things to young people, to the point where somebody wanted to use a theater and they're like, we don't have anybody to do the sound. So I'm like, well, how much are you going to pay this person? Okay, well, I have a 12-year-old right here who knows the system. So I started putting the kids who knew nothing, but they started to realize what they can do. Then they started getting jobs left and right. Kurt Franklin came through the city. They actually was able to build his wall, his staging, did his lights for him during his major concert. So those kind of things is what, like I said, what all you guys are saying, showing people from the beginning their creative juice and letting them know that they can do greater and bigger things. And that's what Team Focus does. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. It just made me think the same with some of the artists that I've worked with. And so, yeah, I've worked with artists who are like career established artists. Mm-hmm. But what I realized is that a lot of the artists, I was seeing their work. Once I began curating more and I was starting to make more connections and relationships, build relationships with folks, and it was folks hitting me up and I'm looking at their art and I'm like, okay, yeah, it's dope. I mean, you know, I don't try to turn anybody away, you know, but it still has to be, you know, aesthetically look away, you know, for when I curate stuff. But anyway, that's not important to what I'm getting at. But what I was noticing is a lot of artists who like had never shown their work before. They were like, I've never shown my work. It's my first time. I've never been in a show. I've never been in an exhibition. I don't know how to do this. And I've had several artists at this point. And I actually pride in it because I think it's beautiful that I can say, hey, this artist had never been in a show before and they've been in this show. And several of artists have sold their work in my shows for the first time. Like one of my artist friends, it was his first time. Like I didn't even know this beforehand. Like I hooked up with him. I didn't know him. We met. I do a show called I Still Love Her as well. It's a celebration of women in hip hop. So he had never shown his work before. I didn't know that beforehand. So I hooked up with him. He brought it art. He came and he sold both pieces. And then after he posted, he was like, yeah, this is my first time being in the show. And I sold both my pieces. And I was like, you've never been in a show before? He was like, no, this is my first time. I said, why didn't you tell me that? You know, I was like, when I did the curator talk, he was like, I didn't know. But like now I'm saying this to say at this point, this was a few years back. Now, I mean, he's selling work like not just in St. Louis, like he's going to different places and like he's selling huge canvas prints as well as original pieces. And he's not the first. It's been several artists and it's been a lot of youth artists who had youth, because I have some people to be like, hey, can youth, and I actually love when youth want to submit work because I don't want it to just be adults. I want people to be able to see youth art as well, and youth feel like that they can be a part of something like this and also be able to have people see their work. But again, I always push that this is an opportunity for folks to not just see your work, but to connect with you, but also be able to get paid off your craft. Like it's nothing greater than be able to being paid for something that you're passionate about and that people want to invest in you in that way. So now at this point, it's been a lot of mainly like emerging artists for folks who have like haven't been in any type of like gallery space or exhibition or exhibit. But at this point, you know, that's been kind of the going theme, which I've really been enjoying because again, it's an opportunity for and to give confidence to folks to be like, hey, people actually do want to see my stuff. Like my work is valued in a way because a lot of times, especially again with Black artists, we don't have access to the same space a lot of times to be able to have their work on display and people actually come in and look at it on the wall. So for that to happen is super dope. So yeah, same thing. Like, yeah.
Agree.
Yeah.
I want to wrestle with a couple questions, and y'all are hitting on some really, really good points. But Rabbi Rose kind of talked about the artistry of Jesus, and just for faith leaders, all of all denominations and all faiths, whoever that leader is always a craftsman and always an artist. And so I'm curious today, why is it that so many faith leaders struggle with integrating art and innovation into their spaces and into their worship services? There's value in tradition. I'm not knocking tradition. I'm an old millennial, so I value tradition. But it really is interesting, especially with the conditions that the pandemic has created. It really seems like some folks are very resistant to incorporating and integrating innovation and creativity in worship spaces. And I'm curious as to why you all think that is.
The hurdle is getting past thinking that art is just show. A lot of churches I'm a minister too, and a lot of churches, when it comes to praise dance, when it comes to mime, when it comes to, production of any kind, they think production. And I think, well, production has its place, ministry has its place, but but because of the pandemic, a lot of people are realizing that the two can go hand in hand and God can still get the glory in both. So there is a change, at least in the churches that I'm around. There is a big shift happening that has happened over these past 2 years.
I think a lot of the churches too, particularly around the country, and particularly Black churches, found that they had to go to technology by necessity. I told somebody that a lot of churches, Black churches, brown churches, died during the pandemic. But because of technology, because of the dragging willingness by a lot of pastors, because they became willing, but you had to drag them into the realization that the only way that the churches was going to survive was going to be based upon technology. And just to go back to what the brother said.
Yeah, I know he just dipped out again. I would say this to further on, because he'd probably come back. Based on what he was just saying, I know some churches who, because of the pandemic, they removed all of their pews. They turned their whole sanctuary into production. You know, they have dancers, they have singing. Now, this was a traditional church. They wouldn't have had it before, but they've took a hold of this and saw the shift in their own ministry. And now 100% is completely different vibe at that ministry.
You know, I think a large part of this problem, and I think the pastor we just lost may be getting at this, is that we forget that traditions were once created, right?
Yeah.
You know, somebody started this, right? And I have no doubt that when whatever it was created, there were a whole bunch of people saying, "Oh my God, you know, how can you do that?" Right? And I think that we forget there was a French philosopher. His name was Henri Bergson. He used to talk about the creative elan, you know, that runs through the world. And I think people become frightened, and part of this because they forget that once things were different. That's everything has a birthday, except God. And so I think fear, short-sightedness, and the other thing I want to say here is that I'm moving the. I don't know if I want to say this, but if I'm moving the discussion where you don't want to go, let me know. I had the privilege of studying with the late Dr. Abraham Heschel, who was closely related to Martin Luther King Jr. Hi, welcome back. Let me step off, Pastor, because you know.
Listen,
I got a funny feeling that Satan is messing around with this thing.
I know. Oh, Rabbi,
Go ahead.
And I told this sister, I said, listen, I'm just going to try it one more again. I didn't even say again. I said again. I said, I'm going to try one more again. And I'm sorry, y'all. I'm listening and I'm getting just as much, but a lot of it is tradition. You realize in Missouri and in the Midwest, it is strictly tradition. It is, I don't care, Black church, the most progressive Black church is moderate to left. Because it's Missouri, because it's the heart of America, because it's folk who have come up from Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama, Southern St. Louis. And so the pandemic forced those brothers and some sisters to begin to rely on something that they were totally unfamiliar with, coupled with the fact that a lot of them are not learned preachers. And so they didn't go to anybody's seminary.
He has a lot of good points.
So much wisdom.
I'm telling you guys, it's got to be
so much wisdom. Well, I'll push on, but I think that's important to kind of grapple with. I think that there's a lot of truth, right, that art uncovers, whether it's by way of the art form or whether it's a spiritual matter, whether it's a social matter, whether it's a political matter. We have a really unique opportunity to uncover truth by way of our art, by way of our proclaiming. And so it's interesting to me to think about what what in your ministries and your work, and I know some of us do have to hop off soon. I know Rabbi Neil is actually on his way to Bible study. But what role do you all play as faith leaders and also as facilitators of art to help uncover truth and to help mobilize people?
For myself, we've done, and up until the pandemic, I don't get involved in a church per se and all that. What I've been involved in is I had a venue that and we were introducing young artists, and somebody who had never had a show before, a group of young 20-somethings of color came in and did a show for their very first show because they couldn't get in anywhere else. And I think it's parallel the situation with churches. There's an established order in galleries. There's an established sense of this will sell, that'll sell, you know, this is what people want to see. And then there has to be an opening for what's different and what's new. And an opportunity for people to start somewhere, to begin somewhere. With the pandemic, we had to close that space. We've continued online, and now we're looking at how can we reopen? What can we do? We're waiting on Pastor Jonathan Tremaine Thomas has bought a coffee house in Ferguson, wants to reopen it. If that happens, we hope to get the walls to be able to get a memorandum of understanding and be able to do professional. And when I say professional, that includes young and new professional, but of high quality aesthetic artwork. But online, open to proposals. Love to put different things up. Have space at St. Peter's United Church of Christ, which has a community resource center. Want to aim that towards high schoolers and undergraduates so that maybe they can have a learning experience putting a show together. And then last year we did a children's art festival and did that at the market, put the art outside in the market, was able to do that in tents and did booklets, and we're going to do it again. And that gets some recognition on the very young artists who are usually really out there. They do the stuff that just pops. So that's my role. It's not so much in the churches, it's out in the community.
Adina, I just think your question's a great question, because I think that's some of what religious leaders fear sometimes, is that because art uncovers truth and it conveys truth, I think too often people like me fall into the trap of wanting. Yes, we say we love truth, but we kind of want truth the way we know it and the way we have it. And we're a little afraid of being unsettled or being disturbed or finding a deeper truth or finding that maybe we don't have the full truth. And so we've settled, kind of rationalism and modernism has caused us to settle for the assurance of what we currently know. And we want to just be assured in what we know rather than being open to really seeking deeper sense of truth. So I think that's why art is threatening, because what if it destabilizes my view of what I've believed or what I think I know. And it actually takes me to something that's truer, but sometimes I don't think we want the truth. I think we just want to be reassured that what we know, what we believe, how we see the world is right. And we've actually stopped being open to what is actually true, which is sad. But I think I know in my life, I know in my tribe and with other pastors like me, and maybe this is what Dieter was saying earlier too, this doctrine thing, I just want things that will reinforce the sets of doctrines that I already believe to be true, rather than being open to, well, if what I believe is true, then these things should only support it. And if they don't, then maybe I'm being led into something deeper.
Yeah.
And that also goes, I'm sorry, real quick. That also goes back to the Bible, the old temple and the new temple, that shift, that shift is always hard. Breaking tradition is always a tough situation. But there's power in both the old and the new. Because when they both made noise, the old temple, they was crying at the old one, but they was praising at the other one, but it was a loud noise. And they both sounds gave God glory. So hey, it is what it is.
Yeah, I think too. It may have to do with control. I think that's what you were getting at. And one of my favorite quotes by a Swiss theologian, his name was called Barth. He said once that you cannot paint the bird in flight. And I think that's what we're trying to do. It's a different way of saying, put God in a box, and I want God to look like I do, like white-haired old white guy, So, and that's just not what God looks like. And I always thought there was a lot of beauty in that statement too. And something that art can do is really address beauty. And I think that's really something that's sorely needed, especially in the world today. So I'd rather watch the bird fly than try to paint it, in other words.
You know, I'm just thinking to go back in a somewhat different direction, and that is creativity. In our tradition, we have records we call midrash. They are the history of how people interpreted scripture. And when you're a seminary student, you're busy learning the language and all that stuff, right? So it took me a while. And one day it kind of struck me that what I was reading were the notes left over of creativity, of somebody's creativity. So I remember I had a class, adult education class. I love adults, working with adults. I mean, I spent a lot of my career working with undergraduates, but I loved working with adults. And I put forward a verse and I let the folks kind of chew on it, right? And all of a sudden somebody came up with a statement that I remember, you know, from Rabbi so-and-so back in the 5th century. And well, somebody would say, oh, gee whiz, you know, and I realized, no, you know, this is what we're inheritors of, is a creative process. And what we need to do is to encourage and embolden people to be creative, right? In this case, in my case, and that has a lot to do with the way I do my Bible study. It just so happens that the one that I'm doing tonight is on the grammar of the Bible, but we're doing the book of Jonah. If you want to learn biblical Hebrew from scratch, I'd love to have you as a student. But by and large, what I'm interested in trying to do work is kind of start the thing and then keep my mouth shut and then have people respond, right? And to let them be creative, to appreciate their God-given creativity, where it will go. And we never know where it's going to go, but that's what keeps it going, right? Is this respect. P.S. I'm glad to find out that a whole bunch of you take exception to several thousand years of Jesus having blue eyes and blonde hair. Okay.
We appreciate that, Rabbi. Well, there's a question.
I hope the brothers and sisters on the line don't take offense to that, but I take exception to that.
Yes. So I'm gonna take a question from the chat. Is from Tim Crawford, who raised a question about bringing performance. This is a really, really good question. Bringing performance into houses of worship. Is that part of the conversation? He says that the first time he saw a song presented from Godspell, which is a musical, was during a service at the National Cathedral in DC. And that is, I think, a really important question. We talked a little bit about, Chris raised that idea of entertainment and production, and certain faith leaders are afraid of those types of words because they think of the sanctuary as a sacred space, or the synagogue as a sacred space, and so they don't want to bring production. But it is interesting as we talk about storytelling. And I don't know if you all remember Godspell. I remember it quite well, but it's a beautiful story of the gospel. It's a beautiful story. It was on Broadway. It won awards. And so it is interesting to think about. There are some folks who really do think about their worship spaces as just a hub for life and for living. And so why can't it be a performance venue where we're sharing stories of faith and even of tradition and different things? In particular, when I think about the civil rights movement, so much mobilizing and organizing happened in the church. And so when we think about churches and spiritual spaces of worship, how do we embrace, I think, them as venues, them as performance spaces? Anybody have any thoughts about that?
I think that all was in the beginning. Most of the arts, I believe, started out in sacred space and eventually wound up got kind of wild, and eventually kind of wound up on the steps.
The first plays in theater were about Jesus and the crucifixion. Those were the very first in Greek. The Greek plays was all about Jesus and all about the crucifixion, all about the God and all of those things. It was one church that I was working with, going about the production aspect. And what we did is, the church like, well, we don't think it fits into our service, but you can do something on a Friday night. So we put together something. What we did is every family in this church, they had a story out the Bible, and they had to act as a family to bring that story to life. So in one night, we told the story. We went through the whole Bible and led to Jesus. So we had Genesis, we had David, but each family picked their story. They had the costumes and stuff. The church was so blown away after that they changed their whole concept, and because they saw that you can give God glory with it, and then they saw the impact that it had. Because most of the time the fear is it biblically sound or is it just your opinion? So most ministries they get nervous about the aspect of somebody's opinion being presented and then not given that the biblical need that should be there. But when the stories are right, I mime as well. So when the stories are right, when the song is right, when the dancing is right, and it gives God the glory, I mean, it all fits the end together.
I come from a tradition. If what we do isn't a production, I don't know what is. We have all kind of rules, right? You start here.
Service is a production.
Stand up here, right? You close your eyes. I mean, give me a break. That's a production. If there is, really, So I don't think it's a question of production. I think it's the fear. I maybe put it this way: if somebody gets up and acts out David, right? That's one person's David, right? If somebody gets up there, I remember one of my kids when they were real young drew a picture of God, right? And the teacher got very upset. You can't do that, right? So my son brought my son who's now really a master artist and a historian of art. He brought it home, and his mother looked at it. She said, "Yeah, that's what God looked like for an instant." And my son said, "Yeah, that's what God looked like for an instant," and moved on, right? And I think that's the problem, rather than see this as a moment of inspiration for somebody, right? Let it flow, right? We get nervous, right? Like this poor teacher, right? And I think it's the lack of appreciation of creativity, right? And I'm not suggesting the other, the other levels aren't important. They really are. But I think the base of all this is God-given creativity. And we often, in the name of that God, stifle that creativity, and we cut people off from God that way, which I think is like, the sin of all sins.
Right.
How's that for self-righteousness?
I think one of our issues too is that many of our traditions, I think, whether it's the Jewish tradition or the Christian tradition, we are very word heavy. It's always about speaking and listening and the like. But now we live in a culture that's very visual. And I think those two, they butt up against each other. And for people in my tradition, that is really, the Reformed tradition is very, very word heavy. And they have always been suspicious of any kind of visual representation. It's a real challenge. But from a multiple intelligence theory, forget about faith for a moment. It's just silly to just focus on one thing and cut out everything else. just because I'm an audible learner doesn't mean anything, because you might be a visual learner or you might be a tactile learner. And so to not provide these opportunities for folks cuts out a lot of people.
Yeah, I think we draw these very arbitrary lines between what is sacred and what is secular when it comes to creativity. And I don't know who gets to decide that line, but we all have those lines as people of faith. We're like, no, that song you can sing because that's sacred. That song you can't sing because it's secular. And I'm not always sure what the difference is. And I think we just need to admit that that's arbitrary often. I see the same thing now, because then there's kind of the art that's allowed because it's traditional art, or musical styles that are allowable. In our church, we use a lot of really dramatic lighting. We got these lighting engineers who, they go crazy. And some of our people sometimes are like, those lights are just too crazy. They're too busy. And I say, I've been in churches where the organist, though, the artist is just going up all over the organ and all these different stops. And it's crazy, but it's also wonderful to see an artist. The Psalms talk about this, everything that has life and breath, praise the Lord. And you go through and you name all the things. So I'm like, well, if the lights can be used to praise the Lord, then why do we have a problem with that? I remind people that, at one time stained glass was technology. You could bring beautiful colors into a sanctuary, and that was really fine technology. And so we draw these lines between, when can technology stop? When can music stop progressing? What is sacred? What is secular? What is, and I just think we need to, a lot of those lines are arbitrary. So, you want to sing Godspell and have a moment with that, you should. And I just think there's something to be learned from all of those things. And we tend to make lines in the sand that they're not real. They're like, the Bible doesn't have those lines. You shall not sing Godspell. No, it doesn't say that. So,
and that also goes back to the fact that, like we talked about before, about being creators. In people's lives, they build their craft, they build their talent, they build what they're passionate about. They should be able to bring that to God and give it to Him without having to abandon it for the sake of the ministry. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like that doesn't belong here. That offering doesn't belong.
Yeah.
Why?
Like if that's my heart, that's my passion, I want to give it to God. There should always be a place where God is saying, bring it, because my people need it, So that goes right with the arts.
Agree.
Yeah,
go ahead, Christian.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was gonna say really quick, because a lot of things resonated with Chris. I was thinking that what Chris said earlier, actually, but what I immediately thought about was like Easter speeches, right? So like everything is a performance. Like our kids, they write, we write. I wrote one. I'm sure most of us wrote one, our Easter speech, and we got up and we said it. And and at my church, now prior to COVID, of course, unfortunately, they would. I miss them, but they would do like something for Christmas, something for Easter. They'll do their whole production. They got to the point where they were writing their own scripts and all of that, and the youth were doing it, and it was like amazing, right? And who are we to be like, no, you can't interpret this particular, like, what if that was said to them, right? Like, then they would feel like I did something wrong, like the way that I wanted to express how I receive God, Jesus, all of this stuff. So allowing the space, allowing for creativity, and it's really interesting, like being able to bridge that gap, like we mentioned, like Old Testament, New Testament, New Church, Old Church. But I like, for example, like we can sing modern or more secular sounding gospel music or whatever, and that can be in the space, and that can be beautiful in the space. And we can also have times where we're singing hymns, right? So there's an opportunity for us to tap into like that old church, right? And be able to have all of those experiences, and for us to be able to receive it how we receive it, because people worship differently, we receive things differently. Like some people get happy, clap, stomp, run around. Some people just sit. Some people like, who's to say you're not receiving that, right? And I think it's the same thing with our creativity. And you mentioned, the civil rights, and I think part of, and I'm gonna, I guess, push a little why a lot of folks are leaving church, my age, younger, are leaving churches because they aren't having an opportunity for new, fresh, innovative ways to have this connection within their worship spaces. It's a lot of, you can't do this way, you can't look this particular way, you can't be brought in this way. And this isn't new, this has been happening, but I think now currently there's a pushback on that. And there's a pushback on how we are able to come into church settings. And what part of the reason that has kept me at the church I'm at now is because there was a lot of that fresh, innovative ways of us being able to be in space together, to worship in space together, and also do work together. Being able to think about how we are doing work in the community and what that looks like, right? So it's not just about we are just in this building and people are going to come to us in this building. No, right. We are all so I'm also, I didn't say this, but I'm also a deacon over our testimony ministry, which is just another name for evangelism and outreach. And my former pastor was like, you're an organizer, so this actually makes sense for you. I didn't even make the connection, but he made the connection for me of you organize people in community, you're also doing that within ministry and church. But having we would have our evangelism month was worship without walls. So everything we did was mainly outdoors. We were going around the community, doing communion with the community. We were doing outdoor service. We were doing a lot of different things to be in connection, but going to folks in the community and not just staying within the church and feeling people from outside have to come to us and have to come into our space and have to show up in a particular way. And then also with the activism portion of it, we saw a lot of that within the Ferguson uprising, where a lot of creativity was happening amongst those that were organizing and doing activism at the time, myself included. But we also saw a lot of clergy and a lot of folks of faith in those particular spaces. Just again, I think not doing something new per se, because this fight for liberation has been going on for a very long time. But I think that it was unique in the way of how young folks were being evolved in the process, and how communities of faith were also showing up in amongst other groups that may not necessarily be communities of faith, but collectively coming in a way to do work. I think was a cool and creative, not cool due to the subject matter, but cool in the sense of how folks came together. So I think a culmination of all of that is really I think how we can potentially bridge the gap. But I think saying no, that's just driving more people away from church. I would say, if honestly, probably if I did not find the church home I'm at, I probably would be one of those people that was I got God, I know God, I'm cool with God, but I'm not going to a church.
I think that's so important.
Yeah, because I'm not able to show up in my full self, right? So I'm not able to show up in all of the layers, intersections, what all of those are, being able to fully come fully, and being able to connect with God in a way, and also connect with the community of folks that I'm in. A lot of folks, I'm blessed to have that. A lot of my friends, family don't have that experience. So yeah.
Really quickly, everybody, because I know we're getting ready to lose Rabbi Neil Rose. And so I do want to ask this question from the chat before we lose him, and then we can come back. But there's a question about ritual specifically in the chat. We talked a little bit about production being an area of overlap, but ritual potentially could be another. And so Dr. Rose, you kind of talked a little bit about some of the traditions and rituals, and especially in the Jewish community. What is the role of ritual, both whether it's artistic ritual or faith-based ritual for all of you? Is there a sense of ritual that can transcend religious practices, that can be inclusive for all folks? What do you all think about that? I really wanted to ask that question before you had
Yeah,
to.
thank you, because I have to go creatively teach biblical Hebrew, but I would say that what we lack are ritual artists, right? Um, and what I realized at a certain point is that if I had my way, I would train rabbis in the art of ritual, not particular rituals, but the art and craft of ritual. And I got that, through the study, my reading and studying in anthropology and sociology, where you see that ritual, how ritual works, right? And then there are people, like anything else, who are better at it than others. There are some people who kind of stammer their way through, right? And there are ritual artists, right? And I think I've seen that in our tradition. My mentor, the late Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, really was a ritual artist, and you could see he understood where it all came from, rather than step one, step two, step three. He didn't paint by numbers, right? He understood ritual as a process, as an artistic process. And I learned a lot from watching him do that. So, although I don't do a lot of weddings because I'm primarily, first an academic and later on a chaplain, but over the year I've done a fair amount of weddings and I've done a fair amount of funerals. And I've learned that you need to be artistic and creative with the tradition, right? But you have to be. So I think what's missing here is the component of the notion of a ritual artist. And if I had my way, I would train. I would bring an artist in, probably some in theater, to work with rabbinical students, right? And get them to realize that this is an art. It's an art form, rather than step one, step two. Let's just say paint by numbers. I really thank you for honoring my time constraints. I'm looking for. We're doing this again, are we not? If so, I dearly would like to be involved. Dina, please say hello to your wife. I haven't seen her in a long time, but I haven't been in St. Luke's because of the COVID, but please say hello for me. Anyway, guys, shalom and be well.
Shalom.
I've learned a lot from all the brothers and sisters. God bless you.
Shalom. Thank you so much.
Shalom. I think that with ritual and art, a lot of times it seems like we forget. It's sort of like from the gospel, Jesus said, the Sabbath was made for the people. The people weren't made for Sabbath. And that ritual is the way that we deal communally with real life events that we experience as human beings. And that somehow the creativity is like with constraints, and I'm a visual artist, so it's easier for me to relate to that. But I do iconography, and iconography is a very, very structured form. And you have a way that you draw the figure. It's stylized. You have a certain order to which the colors are added in layers, and it goes dot, 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 dot. But if you compare icons of different iconographers, even St. Michael doesn't look the same in all of them. Even if they started with the same basic drawing, there's a difference. And I think that's the connection to life. Ritual has to connect to the reality. And there are times when pieces of that ritual don't fit the reality, and they have to be creatively expressed, because there are things that happen that don't fit our everyday experience. We still need to celebrate them.
Yeah, what's been interesting for me about COVID is the disruption has disrupted some rituals, and you kind of realize you can live without them. Like, that's not been valuable. And then there are some that have been disrupted. And I have a conviction that a lot of our mourning and grieving communal rituals that we have been, I think a lot of people have seen that the disruption in those rituals have caused hurt. So you kind of get to see how some of these rituals are a testimony to human wisdom that is really beneficial for our experience. And some are just made up and they can fall away. But I also think part of ritual, just generally speaking, other than those specific human moments, it taps into the need for all of us to learn to be mindful and present. I grew up in a very ritualistic culture, and I ran away from it as fast as I could because I just couldn't stay present. I got bored, and I think that's okay. But as I get older, I do realize that there's some value in learning how to go through similar rituals over and over again, and to really try to be present, even when you know what's coming. And I think there's value just to that experience, that discipline, which then helps you be more present in the rest of life.
So I think I like what you just said. And what resonates with me is, we didn't have, during the pandemic, our church was closed for over a year, and we lost sacred space. And I'm thinking, with art, it all depends on where do you display it. You are a curator, and so where do you display it? Do you put it in a museum where it sort of becomes like a temple, or do you display it outside, or are you going to, a sports venue? So I think depending on the venue you pick, your art, your piece, your ritual might look different. It might be the same ritual, but it might look different if you change the location. And so I think sometimes it's helpful to do that, just to gain a different perspective.
Yeah. Our closing question, you all, I think I'm kind of agreeing with Rabbi Rose that we might want to have a part 2 to this, because I didn't get all my questions asked. It's been such a full, really robust conversation. I thank you all for it. I do have one final thought. That we've talked so much about several different tenets of faith and art and the intersection. And so I'm curious, and Christian started to lean us into this, but as faith leaders, as artists, acting artists, active artists, and also appreciators of the arts, what opportunities do we now have as our world is shifting, as our perspectives are shifting, as our hearts are opening? What opportunities do we have to really transform society and offer hope and healing in a fresh way? In a fresh way. Maybe not the way that it was pre-pandemic, but in this, I won't even say post-pandemic, because we're still struggling to get through it while we are navigating this new norm. How do we work together, and how do we offer hope and we offer healing to really transform society?
Yeah, so it's interesting you asked that because I did shift. So I mentioned Invisible No More and some of the heavier content around the plight of Black women, Black girls, Black folks, the specific, very speaking to all of that stuff. And over the course of years, particularly over the last few years, a couple years prior to the pandemic coming in, I kind of wanted to do a pivot I just wanted to lean more into joy. And so I did a show called Black Joy is Resistance. And I just wanted the opportunity, and I think I'm even more at that point now. I think the pandemic even pivoted and shifted and pushed me more to not that I'm abandoning social issues. Absolutely not. That's just in me. So I speak to it, however. But as far as art, I wanted an opportunity for folks to be able to see visually. And artists do different mediums. So there's visual artists on paint, some do photography, some do a multitude of mediums. But I just wanted an opportunity for those coming to be able to see joy and see this this brighter side of life, to be able to have something to believe in, to have some hope. I mean, it's cliche, but so I've become really big on like, what is fiction? So, you know, there's a lot of stories around pain and trauma, specifically Black pain, Black trauma, things like that. And I've really moved off of, like, if it's a documentary, that's kind of one thing. But like, if I'm going to watch something that is something that has creatively made that's fiction, I don't particularly want it to be filled with trauma. Like, I just personally don't. Because I'm like, I can get that in a nonfiction, like I can get that in reality, I can get that in nonfiction, I can get that in like, but when I'm like, I want to be able to laugh. I want to be able, if I'm crying from laughter. I'm like, this opportunity to like reimagine, like, yeah, because for me, and I'll stop, and I'm trying to get it out my head, but this idea of reimagining, I feel like when we push ourselves to create something that may not even be, it's like Afrofuturism, right? Like something that may not even be real, but like let's think about it, let's dig. And I'm saying that while also recognizing that sometimes our trauma and pain hinders us from even doing that, right? For us to even imagine something different. But pushing, and I'm saying I'm pushing myself even as a curator as well, to like this reimagining of what joy and happiness and this other side looks like. Because I feel like when we start pushing ourselves to reimagine, I feel like that it can also happen in reality, right? So like if I'm reimagining like the abolition of like systems and dismantling things and rebuilding things that allows people to have the opportunity to thrive and not just survive, right? If we're talking about abolishing of prisons or abolishing of, you know, all of these different systems and or just, hey, I just exist and I'm just happy and I'm just enjoying some stuff. And I'm just being able to just create for creative sake. It doesn't have any means to an end. It's just allowing me to get out, like we said, rage, anger, frustration, or like, I just want to just create something and I just want folks to be able to see it. But I think pushing ourselves to like reimagining things in a creative way, at least I like to think, that it allows us opportunity to really reimagine how we can exist and be in reality. So I've been really pushing myself there. And I think the pandemic has caused for me to even think about it more because this pandemic has caused us to really look at life a lot more sensitively, right? Because we've lost so much. Yeah. We've lost people physically. We've lost people, you know, me at the beginning, it was a point where I was dealing with like I'm sure a lot of people, depression, anxiety, like all of these different feelings. And like, how do I navigate, you know, this feeling of loneliness, this feeling of isolation, like all of these different feelings. And I think being able to create during that time was super helpful. Still being able to create. I had a period where I didn't have any ideas of anything, but starting to create again or thinking about things that I would like to create. Like I'm gonna like, and leaning into that. I was like, when I'm on a high and I'm feeling it, I'm gonna just lean into it and do it. I'm not gonna think about it. So whatever that is, writing out a new show idea, just writing, creating some stuff, bouncing some ideas off with other folks who are creatives as well, or, you know, but yeah, so I think that for me, it's really thinking about like creating things that is kind of this alternate world of what reality is, but pushing us, I think, that can make that stuff real and tangible in the world. Like some of this we can tangibly have, even if we talk about imagination, but just like we say, we pray, we say affirmations. I think doing that actually leads us in like it's faith, right? But speaking these things, like it's important to speak these things to the atmosphere, speak them, hold them up to God. I think that's important. So I think in creating, I think it's kind of the same thing. And sorry, I was going long, but this is something that's just been resonating with me a whole lot. And I've really been pushing myself to go beyond just the reality. But what can we imagine in our creativity? That's good. And that creativity can then lead to reality.
Yeah.
Real quick, I would just say this because I don't know who's all on here, who's watching or whatever, but we understand that creating in art is not just about the performance level. Every God created us to be creators, and every morning we wake up, all of us are creating something. If you're a janitor, be the best creator you can be.
Yeah.
You take pride in it. You know, sometimes you go to a restaurant and the people are just excited to be there. They love to serve. They love because they're creating something for you. So whatever your passion is, whatever God put in you to create, you just keep creating it, and just watch what God do in your life. That's all I would say.
Yeah. Imagination connects to the virtue of hope. And there's a line in Shaw's play, Joan of Arc, where she talks about hearing the voices, and the voices tell her what to do. It's the voice of the saints. And the knight that's with her says, that's your imagination. And she says, of course, how else would the messages of God come to us?
Yes. I did that monologue when I was in high school. Yes, so much love for that. Anything you want to finish with either Dion or Dr. Dieter?
I really like what you said about, do the best you can. When I work with some of our younger students, like 8th graders or so, and I always like to challenge them to say, what is it that you really are passionate about? What is it? Because I think that's where God touches your heart, and as Rabbi Rose says, this is where God draws you out.
That's where he's at.
And I don't care if you love to cook, by all means, cook.
Create.
If you love to garden. If you love to paint. If you love to whatever it is, but find your passion, because I think really this is where God connects with us in a very deep way. So I really love what you said.
It creates those moments where, like Adam, when he walked with God, those are those moments when we're in our passion. That's our in the dew, walking with God in the morning. That's our moments. Yeah.
And I think I just think it's everything. I think it's so important to just that we all create, right? Like we all have people like, oh, I don't, and I'm saying this to myself too, when I'm like, oh, I don't do anything. And people are like, wait, you do, like we all have gifts and talents to create whatever that looks like. And I think we're doing a disservice when we deny ourselves to think that we aren't creatives in whatever that, and also what comes from that. I mean, and unfortunately, I feel like we have that as children, and then as we get older and grow and evolve in life experiences, like we come further and further away from, like, not everyone, but a lot of us draw further away from that creativity, from that imagining, like because of all of what we experience. But yeah, it's really resonating because so many folks feel like, I'm not an artist, I'm not a creative, I can't do anything. And that's just the furthest from the truth. We all have something in us that is beautiful for us to create and for us to be able to hopefully share with someone, if it's just one person, but sharing that. So.
Well, and the reality is that as we move through a day, we are creating, we are bringing things into the world around us. And those things could be objects of beauty, or they could be objects of destruction. They can be beauty, pain, like we are creative. And so to harness that creativity and to say, but I want to leave a creative legacy of beautiful things, life-giving things, inspiring things, hope-giving things, truthful things, rather than, creating more pain, more destruction, more ugliness, more, we get to choose. And that's one of the things I love about art is the perspective giving, experience of art, that we don't all see it the same. I don't have to see life in one way. So when life is all filled with pain, I can choose to see the beauty in it. And no matter what my circumstances, this is Viktor Frankl, you know, the last of man's freedoms, that thing that can't be taken away is the freedom to choose your perspective, to choose your attitude, no matter what your circumstances are. So I get to choose, even in the worst circumstances, how I want to move through that and what I want to bring into the world around me. I get to choose what I create. And I think that's what those of you who are more formally involved in the arts, that's what you do. That's such a great service, is you teach us how to harness our creative ability and to say, but don't hold this lightly, use it for something powerful and good.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Dr. Dieter.
Sorry, I also think what's really important in this is, you know, I'm thinking back to when I was a kid and I would draw something and then my mother would say, well, that doesn't look like an elephant, you know. So I think it's really important to have mentors who do not judge what you create.
Yes.
And I think that's where the hope is too, to say, hey, you know, just have at it, and, you know, more power to you. You just go and do what you love to do. And that's where I think art can be a lot more freeing than a formal religious, you know, framework that tells you, well, this is allowed and this is not allowed. Who says, you know, that my elephant can't be blue? If I like to paint a blue elephant, I'm gonna paint a blue elephant, right?
You and Picasso. Yeah,
hey,
you guys.
Yeah.
That's it. I love that, Dr. Dieter. Art as liberation. I love that. That resonates with me, and it's something I truly, truly believe in. I have to let you all go. This has been an amazing, thought-provoking, really gratifying conversation. I don't know if you all can see it. There are lots of comments from the chat. Just grateful for a wonderful and powerful conversation, an affirming conversation, and a timely one as well. And so anyone else from the chat that will want to share one final thought, I'm going to put up a slide really quickly while anyone else is gathering a final thought that they may want to share. But if anyone was really, really encouraged by this episode, feel free to donate. We are stepping into the space of virtual programming at the Rep. And so we are really excited to bring more opportunities like this to you all. So please feel free to text REPSTL to the number 44321 if you want to see more of this. If you want to see this lovely panel again, I certainly do. Please feel free to donate so that we can continue to add to our panelists. And I do see one more comment. Give me one moment, everybody. I'm sorry about that. Technology is not my friend today. Just continue. More praise is coming in. Everybody is saying wonderful. Thank you to you all. Thank you. Everybody has been really, really encouraged. So I'll close with, again, another heartfelt thank you to all of you. If there's any way that we can follow you in the work that you all are doing, your curators, your faith leaders, and some of us are looking for places of hope and healing, and some of us are looking for houses of faith. Some of us are just looking for good venues for art. And for creation. So let us know where we can find you on social media. If any of you want to put in your handles, let me know.
You can follow me. It's at Team Focused STL. Focus is past tense. Mm-hmm. So Team Focused STL. And that's everywhere. That's all on all platforms.
Okay. Look for us. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. But we also have a website. Good Shepherd Arts is what to look for. Good Shepherd Arts Center, goodshepherdarts.org is our website. It's Shepherd is tricky. It's SHEPHERD, like sheep herd with one less shepherd. So.
Yeah, we have an Arts and Faith weekend coming up on the 23rd and the 24th, and that will have a clay workshop, and it will have some creative work with flowers and all sorts of things. So if you're interested, you can find us on ladouchapel.org and Facebook, Instagram. We also have a podcast, so if you're interested, you can check us out there too.
I put mine in the chat.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to make sure we scroll them all so that everybody gets to see. Thank you to everybody. And we're so excited for all that you all are doing in your respective spaces and disciplines. And we really are so grateful for you sharing with us tonight. Thank you so much again.
You too, Adina. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great being with you all. Thanks so much.
You too. We'll see you next time. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.